At 58 years old, Isabel Martinez had just closed the largest acquisition deal in her company's history. $950 million. The champagne was still fizzing in her glass when her boss walked into her corner office and handed her a janitor's uniform. What happened next would bring a Fortune 500 company to its knees, and it all started with a password they forgot she still had. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Isabel's hands trembled slightly as she signed the final page of the contract. Not from nerves, she'd been doing this for 34 years, but from the sheer magnitude of what she'd just accomplished. The acquisition of Meridian Technologies wasn't just another deal. It was the crown jewel that would catapult Pinnacle Industries from a mid-tier player to a dominant force in the aerospace defense sector. The conference room at the Ritz-Carlton in downtown Chicago buzzed with quiet satisfaction. Across the mahogany table, Meridian's CEO, Jonathan Hartwell, looked like a man who'd just won the lottery. Which, in a sense, he had. Isabel had structured the deal so brilliantly that both companies would emerge stronger, with Meridian's cutting-edge satellite technology seamlessly integrating into Pinnacle's existing infrastructure. "Isabel, this is remarkable work," said Marcus Thompson, Pinnacle's chief financial officer, as he reviewed the final terms. "The synergies you've identified here, the projected cost savings alone will pay for the acquisition within 18 months. Isabel nodded, allowing herself a small smile. She'd spent 6 months living in hotel rooms, flying between Chicago, Seattle, and Washington, D.C., navigating the complex web of regulatory approvals, due diligence, and delicate negotiations. Meridian had been courted by 3 other major competitors. But Isabel's approach had been different. Where others saw a simple acquisition, she saw a strategic partnership that would revolutionize how both companies operated. The key had been understanding Meridian's true value. While other bidders focused on their existing product lines, Isabel recognized that Meridian's real treasure lay in their proprietary quantum encryption technology. This wasn't just about buying a company, it was about securing the future of secure communications for the next decade. The DoD contracts alone will generate over $2 billion in revenue over the next 5 years, Isabel explained to the room. But more importantly, this positions us as the exclusive provider for the Pentagon's next-generation satellite network. We're not just acquiring technology, we're acquiring market dominance. The months leading up to this moment had been a masterclass in corporate strategy. Isabel had assembled a team of the industry's top talent, patent lawyers, regulatory specialists, and financial analysts. She'd personally flown to Washington, D.C. 17 times to meet with Defense Department officials, ensuring that the acquisition would receive the necessary security clearances. The most challenging aspect hadn't been the money, Pinnacle had the financial backing, but rather the intricate dance of keeping the deal secret while satisfying the intense scrutiny of federal regulators. Meridian's quantum encryption technology was classified at the highest levels, requiring Isabel to obtain special clearance just to review the technical specifications. She remembered the night she'd finally cracked the valuation puzzle. It was 2 a.m. in her hotel room in Seattle, and she'd been poring over Meridian's financial projections for the 4th time. The breakthrough came when she realized that everyone else was valuing the company based on its current revenue streams. But Isabel saw deeper. Meridian's quantum encryption wasn't just a product, it was a platform. With the right investment, it could be adapted for civilian applications, banking, healthcare, telecommunications. The total addressable market wasn't the $3 billion that other bidders had calculated. It was potentially $50 billion over the next decade. That revelation had shaped her entire negotiation strategy. Instead of trying to drive down Meridian's asking price, Isabel had focused on demonstrating value. She'd brought in Pinnacle's top engineers to work alongside Meridian's team, creating detailed integration plans that showed exactly how the combined company would capture new markets. The presentation she delivered to Meridian's board was unlike anything they'd seen. While competitors had offered standard acquisition terms, Isabel proposed a partnership structure that would retain Meridian's key personnel and give them significant equity stakes in the combined entity. She'd personally met with every member of Meridian's executive team, understanding their concerns and incorporating their feedback into the deal structure. Jonathan Hartwell had later told her that it was the first acquisition proposal he'd ever seen that actually made his team excited about being acquired. "Usually, these deals feel like a funeral," he'd said. "But you've made this feel like a wedding." The regulatory approval process had been equally complex. The Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States had to review every aspect of the deal, given Meridian's defense contracts. Isabel had spent countless hours in secure government facilities, answering questions about everything from supply chain security to personnel background checks, but the real stroke of genius had been Isabel's approach to financing. Rather than using traditional debt financing, she'd structured the deal as a combination of cash, stock, and performance-based earnouts. This approach had several advantages. It reduced Pinnacle's immediate cash outlay, aligned Meridian's team with long-term success, and created tax efficiencies that saved both companies millions. The earnout structure was particularly innovative. Isabel had negotiated milestone payments tied to specific technology achievements and contract wins. If Meridian's team could successfully integrate their quantum encryption technology into Pinnacle's existing satellite systems within 2 years, they'd receive an additional $100 million. If they secured the Pentagon's next generation communications contract, another $100 million would be paid out. This structure had been crucial in winning over Meridian's board. They weren't just selling their company, they were betting on their ability to achieve even greater success as part of a larger organization. Isabel had essentially turned the acquisition into a joint venture, with both sides sharing the risks and rewards. The due diligence process had revealed several potential dealbreakers that Isabel had to navigate carefully. Meridian had ongoing litigation with a former employee who claimed to have invented their core encryption algorithm. There were also concerns about their manufacturing capabilities. They'd been struggling to scale production to meet growing demand. Isabel had addressed each issue systematically. She'd brought in Pinnacle's top intellectual property lawyers to review the litigation, ultimately determining that the claims were baseless. For the manufacturing concerns, she'd identified synergies with Pinnacle's existing production facilities that would actually reduce costs while increasing capacity. The final negotiations had taken place over 3 grueling days in Chicago. Both teams had occupied entire floors of the Ritz-Carlton, with Isabel shuttling between conference rooms, addressing last-minute concerns and fine-tuning contract language. The sticking point had been warranties and representations. Meridian wanted protection against unknown liabilities, while Pinnacle needed assurance that they were acquiring what they thought they were acquiring. Isabel's solution had been elegant, a comprehensive insurance policy that protected both parties. If any undisclosed liabilities emerged, the insurance would cover them. If Meridian's technology didn't perform as represented, Pinnacle would be compensated. It was an additional cost, but it gave both sides the confidence to move forward. The signing ceremony itself had been surprisingly emotional. Jonathan Hartwell had founded Meridian in his garage 23 years earlier, and Isabel could see the mix of pride and loss in his eyes as he signed the documents that would transfer ownership of his life's work. She'd made sure to acknowledge this in her remarks, emphasizing that this wasn't an end but a beginning. "Today, we're not just combining 2 companies," she'd said. "We're creating something entirely new. The sum of our parts will be greater than anything either of us could have achieved alone." As the lawyers collected the signed documents and the champagne was poured, Isabel felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This deal represented everything she'd learned in her 34-year career: the importance of understanding your counterparts' motivations, the power of creative problem-solving, and the value of persistence in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The financial media had already begun calling it the deal of the century in the aerospace sector. Industry analysts were predicting that the combined company would capture at least 40% of the military satellite market within 5 years. Stock prices for both companies had surged on the announcement, adding billions to their market capitalizations. But for Isabel, the real victory wasn't the headlines or the stock prices. It was the knowledge that she'd created something that would last. The quantum encryption technology that Meridian had developed wouldn't just benefit Pinnacle's shareholders, it would help protect American national security interests for decades to come. As she packed up her briefcase and prepared to return to Pinnacle's headquarters in Denver, Isabel reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She'd started her career as a junior analyst at a small investment bank, working 18-hour days and learning the intricacies of corporate finance. Every deal she'd worked on since then had been preparation for this moment. The flight back to Denver gave her time to think about what came next. Integrating Meridian would be a massive undertaking, requiring careful coordination between teams that had never worked together before. There would be cultural challenges, technical hurdles, and the inevitable personality conflicts that arise when 2 organizations merge, but Isabel was confident in her team's ability to execute. She'd handpicked the integration team months earlier, bringing together Pinnacle's most experienced managers with Meridian's key personnel. They'd already begun the process of identifying quick wins, areas where the combined company could immediately reduce costs or increase efficiency. The quantum encryption technology would be the crown jewel, but there were other valuable assets as well. Meridian's customer relationships in the commercial satellite sector would give Pinnacle entry into markets they'd never been able to penetrate. Their software development capabilities would accelerate Pinnacle's own digital transformation initiatives. As the plane descended toward Denver International Airport, Isabel's phone buzzed with congratulatory messages from colleagues, competitors, and industry contacts. The deal had been officially announced just hours earlier, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. The aerospace industry was known for its conservative approach to risk, but even the most cautious observers were calling this acquisition a masterstroke. What Isabel didn't know was that her triumph would be short-lived. In less than 48 hours, she would be sitting in the same corner office where she'd planned this deal, listening to words that would change everything she thought she knew about loyalty, respect, and the corporate world she'd devoted her life to serving. The first sign something was wrong came at 7:43 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Isabel had arrived at Pinnacle Industries' Denver headquarters early, as she had every day for the past 15 years. The security guard at the front desk, Tommy Rodriguez, barely looked up from his newspaper when she swiped her badge. That should have been her first clue. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Isabel's corner office on the 32nd floor had floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the Rocky Mountains. She'd earned this space through decades of successful deals, and the walls were lined with photos from industry conferences, award ceremonies, and handshake moments that had shaped aerospace history. The mahogany desk had been a gift from the board when she'd closed her first $100 million deal 12 years earlier. She was reviewing integration timelines for the Meridian acquisition when her assistant, Patricia Coleman, knocked softly on the door. Patricia had worked with Isabel for 8 years and knew her schedule better than Isabel herself did. "Ms. Martinez, Mr. Brennan would like to see you in his office immediately," Patricia said, her voice carrying an unusual tension. Richard Brennan was Pinnacle's CEO, a man Isabel had known professionally for over a decade. They'd worked together on numerous deals, and she'd always respected his direct approach to business. The urgency in Patricia's voice was concerning, but Isabel assumed it was related to the Meridian integration or perhaps a new opportunity that required immediate attention. The executive floor was unusually quiet as Isabel made her way to Brennan's office. His secretary, Margaret Walsh, gestured toward the door without her usual warm greeting. Inside, Brennan sat behind his glass desk, flanked by 2 people Isabel didn't immediately recognize, a woman in her early 40s wearing a navy suit and a man with silver hair who looked like corporate legal. "Isabel, please sit down," Brennan said, his tone formal in a way that made her stomach tighten. The woman introduced herself as Amanda Foster, Director of Human Resources, a position Isabel hadn't known existed at this level. The man was David Park, from the Corporate Restructuring Division. Isabel had heard rumors about restructuring consultants being brought in, but she'd assumed it was related to the Meridian integration. "Isabel, we need to discuss some changes to your role here at Pinnacle," Brennan began, avoiding eye contact. The words hit her like a physical blow. Changes to her role? She'd just delivered the most significant acquisition in the company's history. The ink was barely dry on contracts that would transform Pinnacle's competitive position for the next decade. "I don't understand," Isabel said. Keeping her voice steady despite the adrenaline now coursing through her system, Amanda Foster opened a manila folder and slid a document across the desk. "Due to organizational restructuring following the Meridian acquisition, we're implementing new reporting structures and operational efficiencies." Isabel scanned the document, trying to process what she was reading. The language was dense corporate speak, but the message was becoming clear. Her position as Senior Vice President of Strategic Acquisitions was being eliminated. The Meridian deal would be her last. "This is a mistake," Isabel said, looking directly at Brennan. "Richard, we've worked together for years. You know what I bring to this company." Brennan finally met her eyes, and she saw something there she'd never seen before, discomfort mixed with what looked almost like guilt. "The board has decided to consolidate the acquisitions function under our new chief strategy officer," he said. "Jason Mitchell will be joining us from Goldman Sachs next month." Jason Mitchell. Isabel knew the name, a 38-year-old wunderkind who'd made his reputation restructuring distressed companies. He was talented, ambitious, and 20 years younger than Isabel. The picture was becoming clearer. "What exactly are you offering me?" Isabel asked, though she dreaded the answer. David Park leaned forward. "We value your institutional knowledge and would like to retain your services in a consulting capacity. You'd be working directly with our facilities management team, helping to optimize our operational efficiency across all locations." Facilities management. They were offering her a janitor's job wrapped in consulting language. The room fell silent as Isabel processed this information. 34 years with the company. Hundreds of millions in successful deals. A track record that spoke for itself. and they were offering her a mop and bucket. "This is age discrimination," Isabel said quietly. Amanda Foster's response was immediate and clearly rehearsed. "Ms. Martinez, Pinnacle Industries has always been committed to diversity and inclusion. This restructuring affects multiple positions across various age groups and demographics. We have documentation showing that these decisions were made purely on operational efficiency grounds." Isabel realized they'd been planning this for months. The timing wasn't coincidental. They'd waited until she delivered the Meridian deal, ensuring they captured the value of her work before discarding her. "What's my alternative?" Isabel asked. "Your employment contract includes specific termination clauses," David Park said, consulting his own folder. "If you choose not to accept the consulting position, Pinnacle would provide a standard severance package, 6 months of salary and continuation of health benefits." 6 months. After 34 years, they were offering her 6 months. Isabel stood up, her decision crystallizing with sudden clarity. "I'll take the consulting position." The surprise on their faces was almost worth it. They'd expected her to take the severance and disappear quietly, probably assuming that a woman her age would prefer early retirement to the humiliation of janitorial work. "Excellent," Amanda Foster said, though she didn't look pleased. "You'll start Monday. Report to Frank Castillo in building operations at 6 a.m. As Isabel walked back to her office, the full magnitude of what had just happened began to sink in. She wasn't just losing her job, she was losing her identity. For 34 years, she'd been Isabel Martinez, the dealmaker, the problem solver, the woman who could see opportunities others missed. Now she was going to be mopping floors in the same building where she'd once commanded boardrooms. Patricia was waiting in her office, her eyes red from crying. Word traveled fast in corporate environments, and Isabel realized the news was probably already spreading throughout the building. "Ms. Martinez, I'm so sorry," Patricia said. "This is unbelievable." Isabel began clearing out her desk, a process that felt both mundane and devastating. The awards, the photos, the mementos from decades of successful deals, they all had to go. She packed them methodically, trying not to think about how many of her former colleagues were probably already calculating how this might affect their own careers. The hardest part was the integration binder for the Meridian acquisition. 6 months of work, detailed plans for combining two complex organizations, strategies that would determine the success or failure of a nearly billion-dollar investment. She'd been planning to oversee every aspect of the process, but now it would be handed over to someone who hadn't lived and breathed the deal the way she had. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from industry contacts who'd already heard the news. The aerospace community was small, and major personnel changes didn't stay secret for long. Some messages were sympathetic, others were transparently opportunistic. Competitors hoping to poach her expertise. She ignored them all. By Friday afternoon, Isabel's corner office was empty except for the furniture that belonged to the company. 34 years reduced to 3 cardboard boxes and a sense of betrayal that threatened to overwhelm her professional composure. The weekend gave her time to process what had happened and plan her next moves. She could fight the decision, she had enough saved to hire excellent legal representation, and she was confident that any objective review would reveal the age discrimination inherent in the company's actions. But litigation would take years and would effectively end her career in the industry. She could also leverage her reputation and network to find a position elsewhere. Several competitors had already reached out through intermediaries, and her track record would open doors at almost any aerospace company. The Meridian deal alone was enough to write her ticket anywhere she wanted to go, but as she sat in her Denver home that weekend, looking out at the same mountains she'd seen from her office window, Isabel realized she wasn't ready to walk away. Not yet. Monday morning at 5:45 a.m., Isabel stood outside building operations in clothes she hadn't worn since college, jeans, sneakers, and a plain t-shirt. Frank Castillo was a weathered man in his early 60s who'd worked facilities management for Pinnacle longer than Isabel had been with the company. "You're the new consultant?" he asked, looking skeptical. "Isabel Martinez," she said, extending her hand. Frank studied her for a moment. "I heard about what happened upstairs. That's a damn shame." He handed her a uniform shirt with Pinnacle Facilities embroidered on the chest and a badge that identified her as I. Martinez, facilities consultant. No title, no department, just a name and a function. "Your job is pretty straightforward," Frank explained as they walked through the building's service corridors. "Clean the executive offices on floors 30 through 35. Empty trash, vacuum carpets, dust surfaces, clean bathrooms. Standard stuff." Isabel nodded, though the irony wasn't lost on her. She would be cleaning the same offices where she'd once made decisions that affected thousands of employees and billions in revenue. The first shock came when Frank handed her the master key ring. Among the dozens of keys was access to every executive office, every conference room, every secure area in the building. As a senior executive, Isabel had possessed similar access, but she'd never considered what it meant from a security perspective. "Nobody pays attention to the cleaning crew," Frank said. "You're invisible. People will have conversations around you like you're not even there." He was right. On her first day, Isabel cleaned Richard Brennan's office while he was on a conference call discussing the Meridian integration. He glanced at her briefly when she entered, and she saw the moment of recognition followed immediately by deliberate dismissal. For the next 40 minutes, as she emptied his trash and dusted his furniture, he conducted sensitive business discussions as if she weren't in the room. The conversations she overheard that first week were revealing. Jason Mitchell, the new chief strategy officer, had arrived early and was already making changes to her carefully crafted integration plans. He was cutting the engineering teams that Isabel had identified as critical for successful technology transfer. The cost savings looked good on paper, but Isabel knew they would cripple the actual integration process. More troubling were the discussions about other acquisitions. Mitchell was pushing for aggressive expansion, targeting companies that Isabel had previously evaluated and rejected as overpriced or strategically misaligned. The board was apparently impressed by his ambitious projections, but Isabel could see the flaws in his analysis from her unique vantage point, emptying wastebaskets and cleaning conference tables. By the end of her second week, Isabel had inadvertently compiled a comprehensive picture of Pinnacle's strategic direction under its new leadership. And she didn't like what she was seeing. The most disturbing revelation came while cleaning the IT department's offices on the 28th floor. She overheard a conversation between two network administrators about system access reviews. Apparently, the company was conducting a comprehensive audit of user permissions as part of their post-acquisition security protocols. "We're supposed to revoke access for anyone who's no longer in their original role," one of them said. "That's going to be a massive project," the other replied. "Some of these accounts go back decades." Isabel's blood ran cold as she realized the implications. Her executive system access should have been revoked when she was demoted, but in the chaos of the restructuring, it had apparently been overlooked. She still had administrative access to virtually every system in the company. That night, sitting in her small apartment that felt like a prison compared to her former corner office, Isabel made a decision that would change everything. She wasn't going to fade quietly into retirement. She wasn't going to let Jason Mitchell destroy the work she'd spent decades building. And she certainly wasn't going to let Pinnacle Industries discard her like yesterday's newspaper without consequences. She opened her laptop and began to type, her fingers moving with the same precision and purpose that had once crafted billion-dollar deals. But this time, she wasn't building something up, she was preparing to tear it all down. 3 weeks into her new role as a facilities consultant, Isabel had developed a routine that would have been unthinkable during her executive days. She arrived at the building at 5:30 a.m., 45 minutes before her official start time, and used those precious minutes to explore areas of Pinnacle Industries she'd never had reason to visit as a senior executive. The building's infrastructure was more complex than she'd realized. 35 floors of offices, laboratories, secure communication centers, and data facilities, all connected by a maze of service corridors, mechanical rooms, and utility shafts that most employees never saw. Frank Castillo had given her access to these hidden arteries of the building, and Isabel was beginning to understand just how much power resided in the spaces between the walls. It was during one of these early morning explorations that she made her first significant discovery. The 26th floor housed Pinnacle's primary data center, a room she'd visited once during a security briefing years earlier. But now, approaching it from the service corridor with a janitor's key ring, she noticed something that had escaped her attention before. The biometric scanner beside the main entrance was connected to a secondary access panel hidden behind a maintenance grate. Isabel had seen similar setups in other secure facilities, a backup entry system designed for emergency situations or when the primary system failed. What made this interesting was that the backup system still used the old magnetic stripe card readers that Pinnacle had supposedly phased out 3 years earlier. Isabel's executive access card was one of the old-style cards, grandfathered into the new system when the company upgraded their security infrastructure. She'd kept it as a memento, never imagining it might still function anywhere in the building. Standing in the empty corridor at 5:45 a.m., Isabel made a decision that would have shocked her former colleagues. She swiped her old card through the backup reader, the LED light turned green, the secondary access door clicked open, revealing a narrow corridor that led directly into the data center. Isabel's heart pounded as she realized the implications. This wasn't just about forgotten access cards, it was about a fundamental security vulnerability that no one else seemed to know existed. She didn't enter the data center that morning. The risk was too great, and she needed time to think through what she'd discovered. But as she went about her cleaning duties on the executive floors, Isabel's mind was racing with possibilities. The conversations she overheard that day took on new significance. Jason Mitchell was in Richard Brennan's office, presenting his revised integration plan for the Meridian acquisition. The changes he was proposing would gut the engineering teams that Isabel had specifically negotiated to retain, replacing them with cheaper offshore contractors. The cost savings are substantial, Mitchell was saying as Isabel emptied the wastebasket near his chair. We can reduce the integration timeline from 18 months to 12 and save approximately $40 million in labor costs. Brennan nodded approvingly. The board will love those numbers. Isabel wanted to scream. The 12-month timeline was fantasy. She knew from experience that rushing complex technology integrations led to catastrophic failures. The offshore contractors Mitchell was proposing had no background in quantum encryption systems. But she was invisible in her janitor's uniform, her decades of expertise reduced to the ability to empty trash cans without making noise. That afternoon, while cleaning the IT department, Isabel overheard another conversation that made her blood run cold. Two system administrators were discussing the upcoming access audit, and one of them mentioned her specifically. We found about 30 accounts that should have been deactivated, said Brian Murphy, a senior network engineer Isabel had worked with on several projects. Including that executive who got demoted to facilities, Martinez, I think. Yeah, I heard about that, replied his colleague, Sarah Chen. Pretty brutal. 34 years and they stick her with a mop. Her system access should have been revoked immediately, Murphy continued. She still has administrative privileges on about 15 critical systems. I'm scheduling the deactivation for Friday. Friday was 3 days away. Isabel finished her cleaning duties that evening with a sense of urgency she hadn't felt since the final days of the Meridian negotiation. She had 72 hours before her digital keys to the kingdom would be taken away. If she was going to act, it had to be now. That night, in the solitude of her apartment, Isabel began planning what she would later call Operation Reset. The name felt appropriate. She was going to reset the balance of power at Pinnacle Industries, but not in the way anyone expected. Her first step was reconnaissance. Using her still active executive access, Isabel logged into Pinnacle's network from her home computer. The VPN connection that had once allowed her to work remotely now became her window into the company's most sensitive operations. What she found exceeded her worst fears about Jason Mitchell's leadership. The Meridian integration was already showing signs of serious trouble. Mitchell had accelerated the timeline by cutting crucial testing phases, and the early data suggested that the quantum encryption systems weren't properly interfacing with Pinnacle's existing infrastructure. Error logs showed multiple security vulnerabilities that could potentially compromise classified Defense Department communications. Even more disturbing were the financial projections. Mitchell had apparently promised the board unrealistic revenue targets based on contracts that didn't actually exist. He was counting on winning Defense Department bids that Isabel knew were long shots at best. The man was setting up Pinnacle for a spectacular failure, but the board was too impressed by his confident presentations to see the warning signs. Isabel spent the next 2 days documenting everything she could access. Financial records, engineering reports, correspondence with government agencies, internal memos discussing strategies that bordered on fraud. She methodically copied it all to encrypted drives that she kept in a safety deposit box across town, but documentation wasn't enough. Isabel needed leverage, and she needed it fast. The breakthrough came when she discovered that her old executive access wasn't just still active, it was tied to systems she'd helped design during her tenure. As Senior Vice President of Strategic Acquisitions, Isabel had worked closely with IT to create secure communication protocols for sensitive negotiations. These systems were built with what the IT department called architect privileges, special administrative access that couldn't be easily revoked because it was integrated into the fundamental code structure. In simple terms, Isabel had helped build digital backdoors into some of Pinnacle's most critical systems, and the current IT staff didn't fully understand how those backdoors worked. On Thursday night, less than 12 hours before her access was scheduled to be revoked, Isabel made her move. Using the service corridor access she'd discovered, Isabel entered the building at 3 a.m. when only security guards and automated systems were active. The biometric scanners in the main lobbies would have recorded her presence, but the service entrances used older magnetic card systems that logged entries differently. She made her way to the data center using the backup access route, her heart pounding as she swiped her old card through the reader. The green light seemed impossibly bright in the darkened corridor. Inside the data center, Isabel found herself surrounded by millions of dollars worth of computing equipment that formed the digital nervous system of Pinnacle Industries. Row upon row of servers hummed quietly, processing everything from payroll systems to classified defense communications. Isabel located the specific server rack that housed the core administrative systems. These were the computers that controlled user access, financial reporting, and strategic planning databases. Using a maintenance terminal that was hidden behind a panel she'd helped design years earlier, Isabel logged in with her architect privileges. What she did next was both elegant and devastating in its simplicity. Isabel created what's known in cybersecurity circles as a dead man switch, an automated system that would trigger if she didn't regularly reset it. But unlike typical dead man switches that are designed to protect data, Isabel's version was designed to expose it. She programmed the system to monitor her access privileges across all Pinnacle networks. If those privileges were ever revoked, which would happen automatically when her access was deactivated on Friday, the dead man switch would activate after a 72-hour delay. When activated, the switch would do several things simultaneously. First, it would send copies of all the documentation Isabel had gathered to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Defense Department's Inspector General, and 3 major financial journalism outlets. Second, it would publish detailed technical reports about the Meridian integration problems to aerospace industry forums. Third, it would release internal communications showing how senior executives had misled the board about revenue projections and contract prospects, but the most devastating element was what Isabel called the transparency protocol. The dead man switch would automatically declassify and distribute executive communications, board meeting minutes, and strategic planning documents that would expose years of questionable decision-making at the highest levels of the company. The beauty of the system was its inevitability. Once triggered, there was no way to stop it. The data would be distributed through multiple channels simultaneously, making it impossible to suppress or control. And because it was built into the core architecture of Pinnacle systems, removing it would require shutting down critical business operations for weeks. Isabel spent 4 hours in the data center that night, testing and refining her dead man switch. She built in multiple redundancies and failsafes, ensuring that even if IT discovered part of the system, other components would still function. She also created legitimate-looking log entries that would make her late-night visit appear to be routine maintenance. As she prepared to leave, Isabel realized she was no longer the same person who had walked into Richard Brennan's office 3 weeks earlier. The executive who had been humiliated and discarded was gone, replaced by someone harder, more calculating, and infinitely more dangerous. Friday morning arrived with predictable corporate efficiency. At exactly 9 a.m., Isabel received an automated email informing her that her system access privileges had been updated as part of routine security maintenance. The language was bureaucratic and impersonal, but the message was clear: her digital keys to Pinnacle Industries had been taken away. Isabel was mopping the floor outside Jason Mitchell's office when the deactivation took effect. Through the open door, she could see him on a video conference with Meridian's engineering team, discussing integration timelines that she knew were impossible to meet. He was confident, articulate, and completely unaware that his career was now on a countdown timer. 72 hours and counting. That weekend, Isabel went about her normal routine with a calmness that surprised her. She cleaned her apartment, did laundry, and even went grocery shopping at the neighborhood market where she'd been a regular customer for 15 years. To anyone observing her, she appeared to be a woman adjusting to an unwelcome change in her professional circumstances. In reality, she was a woman waiting for the most sophisticated act of corporate revenge in modern business history to begin. Sunday night, as she prepared for another week of invisible servitude, Isabel's phone buzzed with a text message from Patricia Coleman, her former assistant. Heard they're having problems with the Meridian integration. Some kind of security issue. Thought you should know. Isabel smiled as she typed her response: "Thanks for letting me know. I'm sure they'll figure it out." But she knew they wouldn't. Because in less than 48 hours, figuring out the Meridian integration would be the least of their problems. Monday morning would bring the beginning of the end for everyone who had thought they could discard Isabel Martinez without consequences. And the most beautiful part was that they had done it to themselves. Her dead man switch was now active, and there was absolutely nothing anyone at Pinnacle Industries could do to stop what was coming. Tuesday morning began like any other day in Isabel's new reality. She arrived at Pinnacle Industries at 5:30 a.m., changed into her uniform in the facility's locker room, and collected her cleaning supplies from Frank Castillo. The countdown in her head read 18 hours. The irony wasn't lost on her as she rode the elevator to the 32nd floor, the same elevator she'd taken thousands of times as an executive, now carrying a cart full of cleaning supplies instead of briefing documents. But today felt different. Today, she was no longer a victim of corporate betrayal. She was an agent of justice, and justice was coming whether Pinnacle Industries was ready or not. The executive floors buzzed with unusual activity. Isabel noticed immediately that there were more people earlier than normal, and the conversations she overheard while emptying trash cans carried an undercurrent of tension. In the IT department, Brian Murphy was on his third cup of coffee before 8 a.m., staring at multiple monitors displaying system diagnostics. His colleague Sarah Chen looked equally stressed as she fielded phone calls from various department heads reporting connectivity issues. The Meridian integration is throwing error codes we've never seen before, Murphy was saying to someone on the phone. No, we can't just restart the servers, these systems are handling classified Defense Department communications. Isabel paused in her dusting, ears tuned to every word. Look, I've been telling management for weeks that rushing this timeline was a mistake, Murphy continued. But apparently Jason Mitchell knows more about quantum encryption than the engineers. Who built it? From her invisible position emptying wastebaskets, Isabel watched the IT staff scramble to address problems she knew were unfixable with their current approach. Mitchell had dismissed the engineering teams who understood Meridian systems, replacing them with contractors who were struggling with basic integration protocols, but the technical problems were just the beginning. At 10:15 a.m., Isabel was cleaning the conference room adjacent to Richard Brennan's office when she overheard a phone conversation that made her blood run cold. Senator, I understand your concerns about the Defense Department contract, Brennan was saying, his voice carrying the strained cheerfulness of a man trying to control a deteriorating situation. Yes, we're aware of the security vulnerabilities that have been reported. No, I can assure you they're isolated incidents. Isabel nearly dropped her spray bottle. Security vulnerabilities in Defense Department systems weren't isolated incidents, they were potential national security disasters. And if senators were getting involved, it meant the problems had escalated far beyond internal corporate issues. The conversation continued, and Isabel heard Brennan make promises she knew he couldn't keep. Timelines for fixes that were impossible to meet. Assurances about system reliability that contradicted everything she'd observed in the technical reports. The man was either delusional or deliberately misleading a United States Senator. At 11:30 a.m., Isabel witnessed the first crack in Jason Mitchell's confident facade. She was cleaning his office while he conducted a video conference with Meridian's remaining engineering staff. Unlike his usual commanding presence, Mitchell appeared frustrated and defensive as he responded to technical questions he clearly didn't understand. Look, I don't need a lecture about integration complexity, Mitchell snapped at someone off-screen. What I need are solutions. The board expects this project to be operational by month end. A voice from the speaker, Isabel recognized it as Dr. Rachel Kim, Meridian's former chief technology officer, responded with barely concealed contempt. Mr. Mitchell, with respect, the systems you're asking us to integrate require extensive testing protocols. The quantum encryption algorithms aren't compatible with your legacy infrastructure without significant modifications. Then modify them, Mitchell shot back. It's not that simple. These systems were designed with specific security parameters that can't be arbitrarily changed. If we rush the implementation, you're looking at potential catastrophic failure. Define catastrophic failure. Dr. Kim's response was delivered with the precision of someone who'd clearly had this conversation before. Complete compromise of encrypted communications. Potential exposure of classified military data. Possible system-wide network infiltration by hostile actors. Should I continue? Mitchell ended the video call abruptly, his face flushed with anger. And something that looked like panic. As Isabel quietly emptied his wastebasket, she heard him place a call to someone he addressed as David, presumably David Park from corporate restructuring. We need to accelerate the timeline for replacing the Meridian engineering team, Mitchell said. These people are obstructionist and unprofessional. I want them gone by Friday. Isabel's hands tightened on her cleaning supplies. Mitchell was about to fire the only people who understood how to fix the problems he'd created. It was corporate suicide disguised as decisive leadership. The afternoon brought more disturbing revelations. While cleaning the legal department on the 29th floor, Isabel overheard a conference call between Pinnacle's attorneys and what sounded like federal investigators. We need complete documentation of all communications related to the Meridian acquisition, a voice from the speaker was saying. Particularly any discussions about timeline modifications or security protocol changes. The lead attorney, Catherine Walsh, was frantically taking notes. Agent Thompson, I want to emphasize that Pinnacle Industries has been fully cooperative with all regulatory requirements. Any issues with the integration process are purely technical in nature. Ms. Walsh, we've received reports suggesting that your company may have misrepresented its capabilities to secure Defense Department contracts. These are serious allegations that require thorough investigation. Isabel's pulse quickened. Federal agents were already asking questions. Her dead man switch was still 12 hours from activation, but the investigation was apparently ahead of schedule. At 4 p.m., Isabel made a discovery that changed everything. She was cleaning the boardroom on the 34th floor when she found a document that had been left behind after an emergency board meeting. It was marked confidential and contained handwritten notes from what appeared to be a crisis management session. The notes revealed that Pinnacle's board was aware of the Meridian integration problems but had decided to conceal them from shareholders and government agencies. More damning was a strategy outline for what they called controlled disclosure, a plan to gradually reveal problems over several months while implementing damage control measures. But the most shocking revelation was a list of potential scapegoats. Isabel's name was at the top, identified as the architect of the flawed acquisition strategy. The board was planning to blame her for problems that had occurred after she was demoted, using her absence from the integration process as evidence of poor initial planning. They were going to destroy her professional reputation to save themselves. Isabel photographed the document with her personal phone, her hands shaking with rage. These people had humiliated her, discarded her, and now they planned to make her the fall guy for their own incompetence. But they had no idea what was coming for them in 8 hours. As the day shift employees began leaving the building, Isabel went about her end-of-day cleaning routine with mechanical precision. But her mind was focused on the timer counting down. In her head, 7 hours. 6 hours. 5. At 6 p.m., she was alone on the executive floors except for security guards and the occasional late-working manager. The building felt different at this hour, quieter, more vulnerable, like a fortress that didn't know its walls had already been breached. Isabel made her way to Richard Brennan's office for the final cleaning of the day. As she dusted his desk, she noticed that his computer was still logged in, displaying an email thread marked Urgent, Crisis Management. The emails revealed the full scope of Pinnacle's deception. Brennan was coordinating with public relations firms, legal advisors, and government liaisons to minimize the fallout from what they were calling technical difficulties with the Meridian integration. But the internal communications told a different story. They knew the integration was failing catastrophically, and they were desperately trying to hide it long enough to secure additional Defense Department contracts. One email from Jason Mitchell caught her attention. We need to identify who has access to sensitive integration data. If this information leaks before we implement damage control, we're looking at potential criminal liability. Criminal liability. They knew they were breaking the law. At 9 p.m., Isabel finished her cleaning duties and signed out with building security. She drove home through Denver's quiet streets, her mind focused on the final countdown. 3 hours and 27 minutes, she spent the remaining time at her kitchen table, writing a detailed letter that she would send to several journalists the following morning. The letter outlined her 34-year career at Pinnacle, the circumstances of her demotion, and what she'd observed during her time as a facilities consultant. But more importantly, it provided context for the documents that would soon be released by her dead man switch. At exactly 12:33 a.m., Isabel's computer chimed with a notification she'd been expecting. Her dead man switch had activated across the city. Automated systems began executing the most comprehensive corporate data dump in business history. Secure file servers that had never been breached suddenly began transmitting terabytes of sensitive information to predetermined recipients. Email servers that handled executive communications started forwarding message archives to regulatory agencies and news organizations. Isabel sat in her dark apartment, watching news feeds on her laptop as the first reports began appearing. Initially, there were just brief mentions of unusual network activity at Pinnacle Industries. But within an hour, financial reporters were posting stories about leaked documents suggesting serious problems with the Meridian acquisition. By 3 a.m., the story had exploded across business media. Headlines screamed about security breaches, fraudulent government contracts, and executive cover-ups. The leaked documents painted a picture of systematic deception that reached the highest levels of corporate leadership. Isabel's phone began ringing at 4 a.m. with calls from reporters, former colleagues, and industry contacts. She ignored them all, watching instead as Pinnacle's stock price began plummeting in pre-market trading. At 6 a.m., she received a text message from Frank Castillo, buildings in chaos. Feds everywhere. Don't think you need to come in today. Isabel smiled as she typed her response. Thanks for letting me know, Frank. I think my consulting work here is finished. By 8 a.m., the story had reached national news networks. CNBC was running continuous coverage of what they were calling the Pinnacle Papers, thousands of leaked documents that exposed corporate fraud, regulatory violations, and potential national security breaches. The most damaging revelations centered on Jason Mitchell's misrepresentation of Meridian's integration timeline and capabilities. Internal emails showed that he'd known the quantum encryption systems were incompatible with Pinnacle's infrastructure but had hidden this information from the board and government agencies. Even more devastating were recordings of board meetings, where executives discussed strategies for concealing integration problems while continuing to pursue additional Defense Department contracts. The recordings had been captured by Pinnacle's own security systems that Isabel had helped design years earlier. At 10 a.m., Isabel watched a live news conference where Richard Brennan attempted to address the crisis. He looked haggard and defensive as he fielded questions from reporters who clearly knew more about Pinnacle's internal operations than he was comfortable with. "These leaked documents represent a serious breach of corporate security," Brennan said. "We are working with federal authorities to identify the source of this illegal disclosure and will prosecute to the fullest extent of the law." A reporter immediately challenged him. "Mr. Brennan, these documents suggest that Pinnacle Industries has been deliberately deceiving shareholders and government agencies about critical security vulnerabilities. Are you saying the content of these leaks is false?" Brennan's pause was telling. "We stand behind our business practices and our commitment to national security." It wasn't a denial, and everyone in the press room knew by noon, Pinnacle stock had lost 60% of its value. The Securities and Exchange Commission had announced a formal investigation. The Defense Department had suspended all contracts pending a security review. And 3 major law firms had already filed class action lawsuits on behalf of shareholders. Isabel Martinez, facilities consultant, watched it all unfold from her small apartment, finally allowing herself to smile. The kill switch she'd forgotten they had was now destroying everything they'd thought was untouchable. And the best part was that they still had no idea who had done it to them. The call came at 7:23 a.m. on Thursday morning, exactly 4 days after Isabel's dead man switch had detonated across Pinnacle Industries like a digital nuclear bomb. The caller ID showed Arv Brennan, Richard Brennan himself, the CEO who had sat in that glass-walled office while she was handed a janitor's uniform. Isabel let it ring. She was sitting in her kitchen, sipping coffee while watching CNBC's continuing coverage of what they were now calling the Pinnacle collapse. The cheerin at the bottom of the screen read, "Day 4, Federal Investigators Seize Corporate Records." The lead story showed FBI agents carrying boxes out of the Denver headquarters, where she'd spent 34 years of her life. Her phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. Against her better judgment, Isabel played the message. "Isabel, this is Richard." His voice was strained, barely recognizable from the confident executive she'd known. "We need to talk. There are developments you should know about. Please call me back immediately." Developments? Isabel almost laughed. The only development Richard Brennan needed to know about was that his career was over, his company was finished, and he was likely facing federal criminal charges. The past 4 days had been a masterclass in corporate destruction. Isabel's dead man switch hadn't just released documents, it had unleashed a cascade of revelations that grew more damaging by the hour. Each leaked email led investigators to new evidence. Every exposed conversation opened additional lines of inquiry. The system she designed was like a cancer, spreading through Pinnacle's corporate structure and consuming everything it touched. Wednesday had brought the first arrests. Jason Mitchell, the golden boy from Goldman Sachs who was supposed to revolutionize Pinnacle's strategic direction, was led away in handcuffs after federal agents raided his Aspen home. The charges included securities fraud, conspiracy, and knowingly compromising classified defense systems. His confident smile from those boardroom presentations had been replaced by a blank stare as he was perp-walked past news cameras. But Mitchell was just the beginning. The leaked documents had revealed a network of corruption that extended far beyond Pinnacle's executive suite. Defense Department officials who had fast-tracked contract approvals in exchange for consulting fees. Congressional staffers who had shared classified information about upcoming procurement opportunities. Regulatory officials who had ignored safety warnings in exchange for promises of lucrative private sector jobs. Isabel's phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed unknown number. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Ms. Martinez? This is Agent Jennifer Thompson with the FBI Financial Crimes Task Force. We'd like to speak with you about your employment at Pinnacle Industries." Isabel had been expecting this call. "Agent Thompson, I'd be happy to cooperate with your investigation." "Excellent. Can you come to our Denver field office this afternoon? We have some questions about the Meridian acquisition and the subsequent integration process." "Of course. Should I bring an attorney?" There was a pause. "That's your choice, Ms. Martinez. But I want to be clear, you're not a target of our investigation. We believe you may have information that could be helpful to our case." Isabel smiled. They still didn't know. For days after her digital time bomb had destroyed their target, federal investigators still hadn't identified the source of the leak. The beauty of her dead man's switch was its untraceable nature. The data release had been triggered by automated systems that left no fingerprints, activated by the company's own decision to revoke her access. "I'll see you at 2 p.m., Isabel said. The FBI's Denver field office was a stark concrete building that looked more like a fortress than a government workplace. Agent Thompson turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s who had clearly spent considerable time studying the leaked documents. "Ms. Martinez, let's start with your role in the Meridian acquisition," Thompson said, settling into a chair across from Isabel in a sterile interview room. "Our understanding is that you were the lead negotiator for that deal." "That's correct. I spent 6 months working on the acquisition, from initial due diligence through final closing." "And after the deal closed, what was your involvement in the integration process?" Isabel kept her expression neutral. "I wasn't involved in the integration process. My employment was restructured immediately after the acquisition closed." Thompson consulted her notes. "Restructured how?" "I was removed from my position as Senior Vice President of Strategic Acquisitions and offered a consulting role in facilities management." "Facilities management." Thompson's tone was carefully neutral, but Isabel could see the wheels turning. "That seems like a significant change in responsibilities." "It was." "Why do you think Pinnacle made that decision?" Isabel considered her answer carefully. She needed to appear cooperative without revealing too much. "I believe the company wanted to bring in new leadership for the post-acquisition phase. Jason Mitchell was hired to oversee strategic operations." "And how did you feel about that decision?" "Disappointed, obviously. But corporate restructuring isn't uncommon after major acquisitions." Thompson leaned forward. "Ms. Martinez, I'm going to be direct with you. The leaked documents paint a very disturbing picture of how the Meridian integration was handled. Based on your experience and expertise, do you believe the integration strategy was sound?" Isabel chose her words carefully. "From what I observed in my facilities consulting role, there appeared to be significant technical challenges that weren't being adequately addressed." "What kind of challenges?" "The quantum encryption systems that made Meridian valuable required specialized knowledge to integrate properly. When the experienced engineering teams were replaced with offshore contractors, the integration became much more difficult." Thompson made notes as Isabel spoke. "Did you report these concerns to anyone?" "Agent Thompson, I was a facilities consultant. My job was to empty trash cans and clean bathrooms. No one was asking for my technical opinions." The interview continued for 2 hours, with Thompson methodically walking through the timeline of the acquisition and integration. Isabel answered every question honestly, carefully avoiding any mention of her after-hours activities or her ongoing access to company systems. As they wrapped up, Thompson asked the question Isabel had been dreading. "Ms. Martinez, do you have any idea who might have had access to the documents that were leaked?" Isabel met her eyes directly. "Agent Thompson, those documents came from multiple systems across the entire company. Whoever released them would have needed comprehensive access to executive communications, board meeting records, technical reports, and financial data. That's not something a facilities consultant would have." "It wasn't a lie. It was simply an incomplete truth," Thompson nodded thoughtfully. "If you think of anything else that might be helpful to our investigation, please don't hesitate to contact me." As Isabel left the federal building, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "We know what you did. Meet us at Confluence Park at 8 p.m. where we go public." Isabel's blood ran cold. Someone had figured it out. Confluence Park was a popular recreation area where the South Platte River met Cherry Creek, usually crowded with joggers and cyclists even in the evening. Isabel arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a bench that gave her clear sight lines in all directions. At exactly 8 p.m., a figure approached from the bike path. As he got closer, Isabel recognized David Park from corporate restructuring, the man who had sat in Richard Brennan's office while they offered her a janitor's job. "Hello, Isabel," Park said, settling onto the bench beside her. "Beautiful evening, isn't it?" "What do you want, David?" Park smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I want to congratulate you on the most sophisticated act of corporate revenge I've ever seen. Truly impressive work." Isabel kept her expression neutral. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Of course you don't. Just like you had no idea that your old executive access was still active. Just like you had no idea about the backup entry systems in the data center. Just like you had no idea how to program a dead man's switch that could bring down a Fortune 500 company." Isabel's mind raced. How much did he actually know versus how much was he guessing? "David, if you have something to say, say it." Park pulled out a tablet and showed Isabel a series of security camera screenshots. The images were grainy, but they clearly showed someone entering the data center through the service corridor at 3 a.m. on the night she'd planted her dead man switch. The cameras in the service areas use older systems that log entries differently, Park said. Most people don't know they exist. But I've been doing corporate security for 15 years, and I know how to look for things that don't belong. Isabel studied the images. The figure was wearing maintenance coveralls and a cap that obscured their face, but she recognized her own posture and gait. Even if that's me, Isabel said carefully, being in the building after hours isn't a crime. I had legitimate access as a facilities consultant. True. But what you did while you were there might be a different story. Park swiped to a new screen showing system logs from the night in question. These show administrative access to core network systems at the exact time you were in the data center. Access that came from your old executive credentials that should have been deactivated but weren't due to an oversight in the IT department. Isabel felt a chill run down her spine. The logs were more detailed than she'd expected. What's interesting, Park continued, is that I discovered this 3 days ago. But I haven't shared it with federal investigators. Why not? Park's smile became genuine for the first time. Because I think you did exactly what needed to be done. Pinnacle Industries was a corrupt organization led by incompetent executives who were about to cause a national security disaster. You stopped them. Isabel stared at him in surprise. I don't understand. Isabel, I've been documenting corporate malfeasance for over a decade. I knew the Meridian integration was doomed from the beginning. I tried to warn the board about Jason Mitchell's incompetence, but they wouldn't listen. They were too impressed by his Goldman Sachs pedigree and his confident presentations. Park leaned back on the bench, watching joggers pass on the river trail. When I saw what you'd done, I was initially angry. You destroyed my employer and probably ended my career. But then I realized something, you'd also prevented a catastrophe that could have compromised American national security. So what do you want? I want to offer you a job. Isabel blinked in surprise. Excuse me? I'm starting my own corporate investigation firm, specializing in identifying fraud, corruption, and incompetence before they can cause serious damage. I need someone with your combination of industry expertise and... He gestured toward the tablet, technical capabilities. You want to hire me to do to other companies what I did to Pinnacle. I want to hire you to prevent the need for what you did to Pinnacle. Think of it as corporate preventive medicine. Isabel considered the offer as they sat in comfortable silence, watching the evening light fade over the Denver skyline. In the distance, she could see the Pinnacle Industries building, many of its windows dark as the company struggled to maintain basic operations. What about the evidence you've collected? Isabel asked. Park closed the tablet and slipped it into his jacket pocket. What evidence? I'm a corporate restructuring consultant, not a digital forensics expert. I wouldn't know a system log from a grocery list. Isabel smiled for the first time in weeks. When do we start? How about Monday? I have 3 companies that could benefit from our services. And I'm willing to bet that after what happened to Pinnacle, there are a lot of executives out there who might want to make sure their own houses are in order. As they shook hands in the gathering darkness, Isabel felt something she hadn't experienced since the day she'd signed the Meridian acquisition papers, hope for the future. Behind them, the lights of Denver stretched toward the mountains, and somewhere in that grid of illumination, the executives who had thought they could discard Isabel Martinez without consequences were probably lying awake, wondering how their perfectly ordered world had collapsed so completely. They would never find out that the woman they'd handed a mop and bucket had been the architect of their destruction. But Isabel would know. And for the rest of her career, every time she walked into a boardroom as David Park's partner in corporate justice, she would remember that sometimes the most powerful weapon in the business world isn't money or connections or prestigious credentials. Sometimes it's simply being underestimated by people who should have known better. The woman who had once closed a $950 million deal was about to become something far more dangerous, a corporate vigilante with nothing left to lose and everything needed to win, and this time, she wouldn't be fighting alone. 6 months later, Isabel Martinez sat in the penthouse conference room of a gleaming Seattle skyscraper, facing the executive team of Quantum Dynamics Corporation. Unlike her days at Pinnacle Industries, she wasn't here to negotiate an acquisition or pitch a strategic partnership. She was here as the co-founder of Park and Martinez Corporate Integrity, and the executives across from her looked nervous. Ms. Martinez, said Quantum Dynamics CEO, Jennifer Walsh, we appreciate you taking the time to meet with us. Given what happened at Pinnacle Industries, we want to ensure our house is completely in order. Isabel opened her laptop with the same precision she'd once used to prepare acquisition documents. But now her tools were different: forensic accounting, software, digital security scanners, and behavioral analysis protocols that could detect corporate fraud before it metastasized into a company-killing cancer. Ms. Walsh, our preliminary review has identified several areas of concern, Isabel said, displaying a summary chart on the conference room's main screen. Your quantum computing division has been reporting research milestones that don't align with your actual technical capabilities. The color drained from Walsh's face. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that your CTO has been inflating progress reports to attract investor funding. The quantum algorithms your company claims to have developed don't actually exist in functional form. David Park, sitting beside Isabel, pulled up additional documentation. We've also found irregularities in your Defense Department contract bids. Specifically, your company has been claiming security clearances for personnel who don't actually possess them. The room fell silent. Isabel watched the executives' faces, recognizing the same mixture of fear and calculation she'd seen at Pinnacle during its final days. The difference was that Quantum Dynamics still had time to fix their problems. What do you recommend? Walsh asked quietly. Isabel's response was swift and decisive. Immediate suspension of your CTO pending a full technical audit. Voluntary disclosure to the Defense Department about the security clearance issues. And a complete restructuring of your research reporting protocols. That could destroy our upcoming IPO, protested the CFO. Mr. Harrison, Isabel said, fixing him with the same stare that had once intimidated billion-dollar acquisition targets, your upcoming IPO is already destroyed. You just don't know it yet. The only question is whether you want to control the disclosure or have it controlled for you. She clicked to the next slide, showing a timeline of potential consequences. If you address these issues proactively, you might face regulatory fines and investor lawsuits. If you continue on your current path, you're looking at federal criminal charges and complete corporate collapse. The lesson of Pinnacle Industries hung unspoken in the AIR.by the end of the meeting. Quantum Dynamics had agreed to implement every recommendation Isabel and David had proposed. As they packed up their materials, Walsh approached Isabel privately. Ms. Martinez, may I ask you something? Of course. The Pinnacle situation, did they really have no idea who was responsible for the leak? Isabel smiled enigmatically. Ms. Walsh, sometimes the most dangerous person in a company is the one everybody underestimates. The flight back to Denver gave Isabel time to reflect on how dramatically her life had changed. Park and Martinez corporate integrity had become one of the most sought-after consulting firms in the country, with a client list that read like a Fortune 500 directory. Companies that had watched Pinnacle's spectacular collapse were desperate to ensure they wouldn't suffer the same fate. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent 34 years building companies up, and now she was preventing them from tearing themselves down. Her phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Coleman. Her former assistant, who now worked for a tech startup in Austin, saw the news about Jason Mitchell's sentencing. Thought you'd want to know. Isabel pulled up the news article on her laptop. Jason Mitchell, the golden boy who was supposed to revolutionize Pinnacle's strategic direction, had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for securities fraud and conspiracy. The judge had been particularly harsh in her comments, noting that Mitchell's actions had endangered national security for personal gain. Richard Brennan had received 8 years. The board members who had participated in the cover-up received sentences ranging from 3 to 6 years. Pinnacle Industries itself had been liquidated, its assets sold to competitors for pennies on the dollar. Isabel felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only a sense of justice finally served. Her laptop chimed with an incoming video call from Frank Castillo, her former supervisor in facilities management. She'd kept in touch with Frank, partly out of genuine affection and partly because he represented the life she'd briefly lived in the shadows of corporate power. Hey, Isabel, Frank said, grinning from his home office. Saw you on CNBC yesterday. Talking about corporate governance. Pretty fancy stuff for someone who used to empty my trash cans. Isabel laughed. Frank, those 3 weeks were some of the most educational of my career. I learned more about how companies really work from you than I did in 34 years as an executive. Well, I'm proud of you. Though I gotta ask, did you really have nothing to do with what happened to those bastards? Isabel's expression didn't change. Frank, I was mopping floors and cleaning bathrooms. What could I possibly have done? Frank chuckled. Right. Just like I'm sure it was pure coincidence that everything went to hell right after they screwed you over. After ending the call, Isabel walked to the window of her new office overlooking downtown Denver. In the distance, she could see the building where Pinnacle Industries had once operated. It now housed a renewable energy company that had bought the space at a bankruptcy auction. Her phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Dr. Rachel Kim, Meridian Technologies' former chief technology officer. Isabel, I hope I'm not interrupting, Dr. Kim said. I wanted to thank you for what you did. Dr. Kim, I'm not sure I know what you mean. Of course you don't. But I want you to know that quantum encryption technology is safe. The Defense Department transferred our contracts to a more competent contractor, and we're finally able to implement the security protocols properly. Dr. Kim paused. I also want you to know that several of us from the Meridian team suspected what had really happened. We never said anything to investigators, but we weren't sorry to see justice done. Isabel felt a warmth in her chest. The engineers, whose work had been jeopardized by Mitchell's incompetence, understood that someone had fought for them. Dr. Kim, I'm just glad the technology found its way to people who can use it properly. It did. And the country is safer because of it. As evening fell over Denver, Isabel prepared to leave her office. Her assistant, a bright young woman named Maria Santos who reminded her of herself 30 years earlier, knocked on the door. Ms. Martinez, you have one more call. Someone from 60 Minutes wants to interview you about corporate whistleblowing. Isabel considered for a moment. Media attention was the last thing she wanted, especially given the secret she carried about Pinnacle's destruction. Tell them I'm not available for interviews, but I'd be happy to recommend some actual whistleblowers who might have interesting stories to tell. As Maria left to relay the message, Isabel reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. She'd gone from corporate executive to janitor to corporate vigilante, and somehow found her true calling in the process. Her computer chimed with one final email of the day. The sender was listed as a friend, and the message contained a single sentence: "Thank you for showing us that justice is possible." The email had been sent through encrypted channels that made it untraceable, but Isabel had a suspicion about who might have sent it. Somewhere out there, other corporate employees who'd been betrayed by their employers were watching her example and perhaps planning their own forms of justice. The thought didn't disturb her. If anything, it filled her with a sense of purpose. She'd never felt during her acquisition days. As she gathered her things and prepared to head home, Isabel paused at her office door for one last look at the city skyline. Tomorrow would bring new companies to investigate, new corruption to expose, new executives who thought they were untouchable. They would learn, as Pinnacle Industries had learned, that in the modern corporate world, there was no such thing as truly untouchable, and Isabel Martinez, the woman they'd tried to break with a janitor's uniform, would be there to teach them that lesson. One company at a time. The kill switch they'd forgotten she had wasn't just a computer program, it was a reminder that power comes from unexpected places, justice arrives in unpredictable forms, and sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one holding the mop. Isabel Martinez had learned that lesson the hard way. Now it was her job to teach it to others, before they made the same fatal mistake that had destroyed Pinnacle Industries forever. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.